To understand the entity known as Tyberos, one must first understand the void that birthed him. He is not merely a chapter master in the conventional sense of the 41st millennium's military structure. He is the apex predator of the outer dark, a region of space where the light of the Astronomican grows thin and the galaxy dissolves into the intergalactic gulf. Tyberos, often called the Red Wake, serves as the commander of the Carcharodons Astra, or space sharks in the low Gothic tongue. He holds the title of Shade Lord, a designation that predates much of the modern imperial organization, harkening back to the ancient rites of the Raven Guard, from whom his gene seed is heavily suspected to descend. This title grants him absolute dominion over the nomad predation fleet, a wandering force that has no homeworld, no fortress monastery on solid ground, and no respite from its eternal crusade. Physically, Tyberos is an anomaly, even among the transhuman physiology of the Adeptus Astartes. While all space marines are giants compared to mortal men, Tyberos towers over his battle brothers. He is permanently encased in a suit of modified tactical dreadnought armor, an archaic pattern of Terminator plate that has been customized to the point where its original mark is barely recognizable. This armor is a walking sarcophagus of ceramite and adamantium, reinforced with additional plasteel bonding studs that give it a brutal, industrial aesthetic distinct from the ornate heraldry of chapters like the Ultramarines or Blood Angels. The suit significantly increases his height and bulk, making him stand eye to eye with dreadnought walkers. He is rarely, if ever, seen without his helmet, a grim faceplate stylized to resemble the maw of a deep void predator, specifically the Terran shark, with a vertical grill that mimics rows of serrated teeth. This creates a silhouette that is less like a soldier of the Imperium and more like a monster from the deep trenches of an ocean floor. The reputation of Tyberos within the wider Imperium is a complex tapestry of fear, uncertainty, and reluctant respect. To the High Lords of Terra and the Inquisition, the Carcharodons are a sanctioned necessity, a weapon of last resort unleashed upon threats that dwell in the Halo stars. However, to the average Imperial governor or even other Astartes chapters, Tyberos is viewed with deep suspicion. He does not attend the great feasts of victors. He does not engage in diplomacy. The Carcharodons Astra appear from the warp without warning, prosecute their war with utter silence, and vanish just as quickly, often taking with them a tithe of the local population to replenish their serfs and aspirants. This behavior has led to Tyberos being regarded as a ghost story, a dark myth told to discipline unruly cadets. There are records from the Badab War, where the Carcharodons intervened against the secessionist Luft Huron, describing Tyberos not as a savior, but as a force of nature that arrived to scour the life from the Mantis warriors' worlds. The Loyalist commanders present noted that fighting alongside the Red Wake felt akin to unchaining a beast that could just as easily turn its hunger upon its keepers. This terrifying aura is compounded by the Red Wake, a term that refers both to Tyberos himself and the phenomenon that follows his deployment. When the Shade Lord takes to the field, he does not shout battle cries. He does not issue vocal challenges. He fights in absolute, unnerving silence. The Red Wake is the trail of slaughter left behind his advance. It is a corridor of absolute death where bodies are not merely killed but dismantled. Tyberos wields two ancient and unique relic weapons known as Hunger and Slake. These are massive lightning claws of an unknown pattern, fitted with underslung chainfist attachments. The gauntlets allow him to tear through the thickest tank armor and the flesh of biological monstrosities with equal ease. The lightning claws disrupt matter on a molecular level, while the chain blades, roaring with adamantine teeth, chew through bone and ceramite. The result of his passage is a literal wake of gore, a swath of the battlefield painted red where nothing remains standing. It is said that during the scouring of the Endymion cluster, entire corridors of enemy strongholds were found reduced to a slurry of biological matter, the walls painted with the arterial spray of heretics, with Tyberos standing motionless at the end of the hall, his armor slick with the fluids of the dead, waiting for the next target. The silence of the Red Wake is perhaps its most psychological aspect. The Carcharodons do not roar for the Emperor as they engage. They communicate over encrypted Vox channels that manifest as bursts of static to outsiders. Tyberos orchestrates this silence like a conductor. His presence on the battlefield suppresses the morale of enemies and allies alike. To the enemies of mankind, seeing a giant in gray, sloped armor wading through fire without pausing, shrugging off bolt rounds and laws fire as if they were rain, induces a primal panic. He moves with a speed that belies his immense bulk, a blur of gray ceramite and crackling energy fields. The Red Wake is not just a description of violence, it is a doctrine of total annihilation. Tyberos does not seek to conquer ground for strategic hold, he seeks to terminate the enemy's existence entirely. Once the Red Wake has been drawn across a war zone, the silence that returns is the silence of the grave. Commanding this force requires a will of iron, and Tyberos exercises his authority from the bridge of the Nicker. The Nicker is the flagship of the nomad predation fleet, a battle barge of ancient provenance. Unlike the floating cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy or the gilded vessels of the First Legion, the Nicker is a utilitarian leviathan. It is a dark, claustrophobic vessel, its corridors cramped and lit by low lumen strips that cast long shadows. The ship reflects the nature of its master, brutal, efficient, and scarred by millennia of void warfare. The air recyclers struggle to scrub the scent of ozone, oil, and old blood from the atmosphere. It serves as the mobile fortress monastery for the chapter, housing the gene seed vaults, the apothecarian, and the armories. Tyberos' sanctum aboard the Nicker is located deep within the vessel's armored superstructure. It is a stark chamber, devoid of trophies or ornamentation. There are no banners of glory, only the humming cogitators displaying logistical data, star charts of the Halo Zone, and the vital signs of the fleet. Here, the Shade Lord sits upon a command throne reinforced to support his Terminator-clad bulk. He is plugged into the ship's manifold, his consciousness merging with the machine spirit of the Nicker. From this position, he directs the movements of the fleet's strike cruisers and escorts. The Nomad Predation fleet operates on a constant footing of scavenging and survival. They cannot resupply at friendly ports. They must take what they need from the enemies they slay or the worlds they offer protection to. Tyberos manages this grim economy with cold logic. He calculates the expenditure of bolt shells against the intake of raw materials, the loss of battle brothers against the acquisition of new aspirants during the Red Tides. The relationship between Tyberos and his fleet is symbiotic. The Carcharodons are often afflicted by the blindness, a gene seed flaw that induces a state of blood madness and solitary withdrawal. Tyberos serves as the anchor, the cold center of gravity that keeps the chapter from descending into pure berserker anarchy. His authority is absolute. When he walks the decks of the Nicker, the serfs and chapter thralls avert their gaze, pressing themselves against the bulkheads. Even his captains, fierce warriors who have slaughtered Xeno's horrors in the dark between galaxies, show him a deference that borders on fear. They know that the Shade Lord is the keeper of the chapter's deepest secrets, the one who remembers the edict of exile that sent their ancestors into the void thousands of years ago. The interior of the Nicker also reveals the scavenged nature of Tyberos' wargear. The tech marines of the Carcharodons, working under Tyberos' direct oversight, maintain equipment that other chapters would have retired millennia ago. The Shade Lord's own armor is a testament to this resourcefulness. It is a patchwork of Mark IV and Mark V plating, fused with the heavier Indomitus elements. The bonding studs on his shoulder pauldrons and greaves are not decorative. They are necessary structural reinforcements to keep the ancient ceramite layers intact after centuries of combat damage. This aesthetic of repair and reuse permeates the entire fleet under his command. Tyberos ensures that nothing is wasted. A bolt shell fired must result in a kill. A drop pod launched must be recovered. This parsimonious approach to warfare stands in stark contrast to the endless resources of the Ultramarines, further isolating Tyberos from his cousins. When the Nicker transitions from the warp, it does so with a violent tear in reality, often bleeding dark energy that obscures sensors. Tyberos coordinates these assaults from the teleportarium decks. He prefers to lead the Terminator Brethren, the Red Brethren, directly into the heart of the enemy command structure. The teleport assault is the signature strike of the Shade Lord. There is no orbital bombardment to soften the target, no drop pod waves to establish a beachhead. There is simply the sudden localized displacement of air, the crack of ozone, and the sudden appearance of Tyberos and his elite guard. In these moments, the Nicker looming in orbit is merely the delivery mechanism for the true weapon, the chapter master himself. His interactions with the few outsiders permitted aboard the Nicker are tense and brief. During the Badab War, when inquisitorial agents attempted to treat with him, they were met with a wall of silence. Tyberos stood motionless, his twin weapons deactivated but still thrumming with latent power while his captains spoke on his behalf. This distance preserves the myth. By never removing his helmet, by never speaking more than necessary, he dehumanizes himself. He becomes a statue of judgment. Some Imperial scholars speculate that Tyberos may be heavily mutated beneath the armor, citing the pale, grayish skin and liquid black eyes common to the Carcharodons lineage, traits derived from a chimeric gene seed potentially mixing Raven Guard stock with Night Lords or even World Eaters, though such theories are whispered only in the most secure vaults of the Ordo Astartes. Tyberos allows these rumors to fester, because fear is a weapon as potent as a bolter. If the enemies of the Imperium believe he is a monster, they are already half defeated before the first blow is struck. The Shade Lord's existence is a lonely vigil. He is the warden of the outer dark, patrolling the sectors where the light of the Emperor is a distant star. He fights threats that the High Lords of Terra are not even aware of: Sloth migrations, splinter fleets of Hive Fleet Leviathan that detour into the void, and enslaver incursions. In these battles, there are no witnesses to record his deeds. There are no statues raised in his honor on civilized worlds. There is only the cold void, the hum of the Nicker's engines, and the rhythmic cycling of his armor's respirators. Tyberos accepts this. He does not seek glory. He seeks only to maintain the red tithe and ensure the survival of his chapter. Every action he takes, every life he ends with hunger and Slake, is a calculation to prolong the existence of the Carcharodons Astra for one more day, one more battle. He is the personification of the chapter's motto. Distinct from the Raven Guard's Victoris aut mortis, the Carcharodons operate on a primal level of predation. They are the sharks in the sensory deprivation tank of the universe, and Tyberos is the great white that never stops moving, for to stop is to die. To stand within the same compartment as Tyberos is to experience a sudden and drastic shift in spatial perception. The architecture of the Nicker is built to Astartes specifications, with bulkheads and archways designed to accommodate the transhuman frame, yet the Shade Lord seems to strain the very dimensions of his flagship. While the Adeptus Astartes are biologically engineered to be giants, towering over the baseline humanity they are sworn to protect, there exists a variance even among the gene-forged. Tyberos represents the extreme upper percentile of this variance, a biological anomaly that borders on gigantism, even by the standards of the 41st millennium's super soldiers. When flanked by his honor guard, the Red Brethren veteran Terminators who are themselves hulking mountains of ceramite, Tyberos creates a jarring sense of scale. He does not merely stand taller than them. He looms, possessing a density and width that suggests a physiology pushed to the absolute limit of what the gene seed implantation process can support without resulting in catastrophic organ failure or mutation. This physical magnitude is not merely a matter of height, but of sheer displacement. In the rare instances where Tyberos has been recorded standing alongside standard power armored Astartes, such as during the diplomatic tensions of the Badab War, he appeared to belong to a different genus entirely. His mass is such that the deck plating of standard Imperial vessels groans under his tread, requiring reinforced localized gravity stabilizers when he moves through sectors not specifically fortified for his presence. This immense size has fueled endless speculation regarding the purity of his genetics. While the Carcharodons are ostensibly successors of the Raven Guard, the 19th Legion, the Shade Lord's stature draws uncomfortable comparisons to the Primarchs, or the darker, chimeric experiments of the 31st millennium. There is a brutal solidity to him that lacks the sleek agility usually associated with the Sons of Korax, replaced instead by the crushing inevitability of a tidal wave. Encasing this Titan is a suit of tactical dreadnought armor that is as much a relic of the chapter's scavenging doctrine as it is a tool of war. Technically, the suit is classified as Indomitus pattern, the most common template of Terminator armor found in the galaxy. However, to label it simply as Indomitus is a disservice to the centuries of modification it has undergone. The armor has been retrofitted and reinforced so heavily that the original silhouette is buried beneath layers of ablative plating and structural supports. It is a masterwork of function over form, lacking the gilded eagles, purity seals, and religious script that adorn the wargear of the ecclesiarchy-aligned chapters. The ceramite is colored a flat, abyssal gray, the shade of unpainted hull metal or the skin of a deep ocean predator, designed not to inspire hope, but to blend into the shadows of unlit corridors and the void between stars. The most striking technical detail of this armor is the proliferation of molecular bonding studs. In the era of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, specifically on Mark V Heresy armor, these studs were a sign of hasty production or field repairs, used to bolt layers of ceramite together when proper thermal bonding processes were unavailable. On Tyberos, they serve a similar, albeit permanent, purpose. The immense thickness of his armor plating requires these additional anchor points to maintain structural integrity against the stress of his movements and the impacts of heavy ordnance. The studs cover his greaves and vast shoulder pauldrons, giving the armor a raw, industrial texture. It looks riveted, heavy, and undeniably ancient. The tech marines of the Carcharodons have maintained the internal servo bundles and fiber muscle actuators with near religious zeal, overtuning the suit's reactor to power the sheer weight of the additional adamantium slabs. When Tyberos moves, the armor emits a deep, thrumming bass note, the sound of a reactor running hot, distinct from the whine of standard Terminator suits. The armor's pauldrons are vast, curved expanses of gray that act as mobile shields, capable of deflecting anti-tank weaponry. Unlike the high, flared gorgets of other patterns, Tyberos's armor hunches around his neck, burying his helmet deep between the shoulders to protect the seal from decapitation strikes. The gauntlets are oversized, modified heavily to accept the power couplings for Hunger and Slake, his twin relic weapons. The cabling for these weapons is not neatly integrated, but runs externally along the undersides of the vambraces, thick black serpents of conduit that pulse with lethal energy. Every inch of the plate is scarred, pitted from millennia of void particulate abrasion and the impacts of bolter shells, meltaburns, and Xenos claws. Tyberos does not repaint his armor to hide these wounds. They are simply sealed and ignored, a topographical map of violence that stretches back to the chapter's exile. The focal point of this terrifying panoply is the helmet. If the armor speaks of industrial brutality, the helmet speaks of predation. It is a highly customized variant, likely unique to the Shade Lord, featuring a faceplate that has been extended and sloped to resemble the snout of a Terran shark. Where a standard Terminator helm would feature a Vox grille and respiratory vent in a grimace or a knightly visor, Tyberos's faceplate is dominated by a vertical array of sensory slits and exhaust ports. These are arranged in jagged, serrated rows that unmistakably mimic the teeth of a great white. It is a design choice completely divorced from the noble aesthetic of the Imperium, intended solely to provoke primal fear. When the armor's atmospheric cyclers are active, vented gas hisses through these teeth, creating the illusion of a breathing beast. Above this maw, the optical arrangement is equally disturbing. Most Astartes helmets feature glowing lenses that humanize the wearer to a degree, giving them a face. Tyberos's helm often appears to have no eyes at all. The sensors are recessed deep within the sloped adamantium, appearing as dead black voids. When active, they do not glow with the bright blue or red of standard tactical displays, but emit a dull, faint amber light that is barely visible, like the bioluminescence of a creature in the crushing depths. This lack of visible eyes serves to completely dehumanize the Shade Lord. When an enemy looks at him, they do not see a warrior, they see a machine, a torpedo of gray metal that cannot be reasoned with or appealed to. The helmet is a sensory deprivation tank for the outside world, locking Tyberos away in a sphere of tactical data, scrolling targeting logs, and thermal imaging, separating the man, if he can still be called that, from the slaughter he commits. This visual horror is compounded by the auditory void that surrounds him. In a universe defined by the roar of chainswords and the bellowed war cries of "For the Emperor," Tyberos is an entity of silence. This silence is not merely an absence of noise, it is a weaponized psychological tactic. The Shade Lord rarely speaks in low or high Gothic. His vocal cords, perhaps atrophied from disuse or perhaps simply deemed inefficient, are bypassed in favor of the Carcharodons' distinct battle cant. He communicates through his helmet's vox emitter in bursts of harsh, encrypted static and machine code clicks that sound like the snapping of bone or the interference of a dying radio. To those outside the chapter, this sound is unintelligible and unnerving, a binary language of kill orders and coordinate shifts. On the bridge of the Knicker or in the heat of boarding actions, Tyberos directs his forces with subtle, minimal movements. A slight inclination of the helmet, a gesture of a lightning claw, or a specific sequence of vox clicks is all the Red Brethren require to execute complex flanking maneuvers. This economy of action heightens the aura of menace. It suggests a mind that processes violence with the cold logic of a cogitator rather than the passion of a crusader. He does not need to rally his troops. The Carcharodons are already indoctrinated into a state of lethal compliance. The silence creates a vacuum on the battlefield, a dead zone where the morale of the enemy withers. Confronting a giant who absorbs fire without a grunt of pain, who dismembers squads without a word of taunt or triumph, breaks the spirit of mortal foes. It denies them the dignity of a contest. It reduces the battle to a simple process of extermination. The psychological impact extends to the Imperium's own forces. During joint operations, Allied commanders have reported a profound sense of unease when in Tyberos' presence. He stands like a statue in the strategy, his internal reactors humming, ignoring the politicking and posturing of lesser men. When he does choose to communicate directly with non-Astartes, it is often through a designated proxy, usually a captain or a librarian, further distancing himself from humanity. On the rare occasions he must speak personally, his voice is described as a tectonic grinding, a sound so deep and distorted by his vox caster that it vibrates in the listener's chest cavity, lacking any inflection of empathy or warmth. It is the voice of the void itself, indifferent and vast. This behavior reinforces the Carcharodons' doctrine of the Void Brethren. They are exiles, drifting in the dark, and Tyberos is the avatar of their isolation. His refusal to engage in the theatrics of war, the speeches, the challenges, the shouts of glory, marks him as something other than a hero. He is a function. The silence he projects is the silence of the deep ocean, the silence of the grave. It forces those around him to project their own fears onto his blank, shark-toothed visage. Is he judging them? Is he barely restraining the urge to kill them? Or is he simply calculating the most efficient way to end their existence? The ambiguity is as dangerous as his lightning claws. In the end, Tyberos the Red Wake does not need to scream to make his presence felt. The shadow he casts and the silence he brings are loud enough to drown out entire worlds. If the silence of Tyberos is the psychological weapon that breaks the enemy's spirit, then the twin instruments known as Hunger and Slake are the physical manifestations of his capacity for total annihilation. While the Shade Lord's armor is a patchwork of scavenged plating and reinforced industrial bonding studs, his weaponry represents a pinnacle of arcane lethality that few Forge worlds in the 41st millennium could hope to replicate. To the uninitiated observer, they appear as oversized lightning claws, but such a classification fails to capture the horrific duality of their function. These are not merely weapons designed for dueling or the parrying of blades. They are siege tools adapted for biological dismantling, a hybrid technology that combines the energy-wreathed shredding power of traditional lightning claws with the armor-breaching brutality of underslung chainfists. The technical specifications of Hunger and Slake defy standard Codex Astartes categorization. In a standard Terminator loadout, a warrior must choose between the anti-infantry sweeping capability of lightning claws or the anti-armor crushing power of a chainfist. Tyberos has rejected this compromise. Through forgotten tech rights and the immense carrying capacity of his modified suit, he wields both simultaneously on each arm. The gauntlets themselves are massive, encasing his hands and forearms in heavy plasteel housings that nearly scrape the deck plates when his arms hang loose. The lightning claws consist of 4 curved adamantine talons on each hand, each nearly the length of a mortal man's torso. When activated, The molecular disruption field generators housed in the knuckles wreath these blades in a crackling shroud of blue-white energy. This field does not burn, it unbinds matter, allowing the solid blades to pass through ceramite, bone, and plasteel with barely any resistance, parting molecular bonds as easily as a scalpel parts water. However, it is the secondary mechanism that makes these relics truly nightmare-inducing. Mounted beneath the wrist and extending along the underside of the gauntlet is a heavy-gauge chain-blade assembly. These are not the combat knives or bayonets seen on some pattern bolters, but fully motorized chainfist attachments, complete with their own independent power drives and promethium fuel cells. The teeth of these chain blades are forged from mica dragon teeth or monomolecular edged adamantium, designed to chew through the hull plating of battle tanks and the bulkheads of starships. When Tyberos engages a target, he does not simply slash. He locks the talons into the victim and activates the chain motors. The result is a catastrophic excavation of matter, where the target is simultaneously sliced by the energy field and ground into paste by the roaring teeth of the saw. This dual-action mechanism allows the Shade Lord to tear open a land raider as if it were a ration tin, and then butcher the crew inside without changing weapons. The origins of Hunger and Slake are shrouded in the same deliberately obfuscated history as the Carcharodons Astra themselves. Tech priests who have been granted the rare privilege of viewing picked captures of the weapons in action have speculated that they date back to the shadowed years of the Great Crusade or the early anarchy of the Horus Heresy. The design philosophy, brutal, over-engineered, and showing a disregard for the safety of the wielder, hints at the forbidden armories of the Terran Unification Wars or the dark experiments of the Raven Guard's deliverance techno-guilds before the dictates of the Codex, Astartes' standardized wargear. There are whispers that the gauntlets may be a pattern unique to the Ashen Claws, the renegade kin of the Carcharodons, or perhaps scavenged from the fallen champions of the Night Lords during the scouring of the Nostromo sector. The casing of the weapons is devoid of the aquilas or purity seals that would mark them as sanctified imperial relics. Instead, they are etched with microscopic Carcharodon exile glyphs, marking the tally of worlds drowned in blood. The weight of these weapons is immense, requiring the servo muscles of Tyberos' Terminator plate to be overclocked to compensate. A standard Astartes, even in Terminator armor, would find their center of gravity hopelessly compromised by the mass of such gauntlets. Tyberos, however, wields them with a fluidity that contradicts their bulk. The internal cabling of the weapons connects directly to his armor's reactor and his own nervous system via the black carapace. This hard link ensures that the weapons are not just tools held in a grip, but direct extensions of his will. The machine spirits within Hunger and Slake are described as predatory and ravenous, urging the wielder toward constant slaughter. It takes a mind of iron discipline, such as that of the Shade Lord, to keep the weapons dormant when not in combat. When active, the electromagnetic hum of the disruption fields and the idle growl of the chain motors create a discordance that causes physical nausea in baseline humans standing too close. In combat, Hunger and Slake dictate a fighting style that is entirely unique to Tyberos. Lacking any ranged weaponry, no storm bolter, no assault cannon, no cyclone missile launcher, Tyberos is forced to be a creature of pure aggression. He must close the distance. This necessity shapes the tactical doctrine of his personal deployments. He does not hold ground, he advances. The gauntlets serve as both his sword and shield. The sheer size of the lightning claws allows him to use them as physical barriers, catching incoming power swords or deflecting thunder hammer strikes with the flat of the blades before twisting his wrists to entrap the enemy weapon. Once a foe is snagged in the curve of the talons, the chainfist is brought to bear. Against infantry, Tyberos acts as a thresher. The wide sweep of the lightning claws, extended by his immense reach, can decapitate multiple opponents in a single stroke. The disruption fields ensure that even the power armor of Traitor Astartes offers no protection. The claws simply slide through the ceramite plates, fusing electronics and flesh in a microsecond of thermal violence. But it is against heavy armor and biological monstrosities that the true purpose of the twin relics is revealed. During the Badab War, reports from the Angstrom system detailed Tyberos single-handedly dismantling a siege dreadnought of the Mantis warriors. He did not flank the machine to strike its weak rear armor. He charged it head-on, catching the dreadnought's power fist with Slake while driving Hunger directly through the sarcophagus plating. The chainfist roared to life, spraying oil and amniotic fluid across the chamber, grinding through the armored shell until the pilot within was liquidated. This capacity to breach heavy armor renders Tyberos a threat to vehicles that would usually require a dedicated Devastator squad to neutralize. He has been recorded tearing the tracks off Limun Rus battle tanks, immobilizing them before carving open the turret to slaughter the crew. The chainfists allow him to literally tunnel through the hulls of spaceships during boarding actions. Where other Terminators might rely on melta-charges or chainfist-equipped specialists to breach a sealed bulkhead, Tyberos simply walks through it. He plunges both gauntlets into the metal, the adamantine teeth screaming as they chew a man-sized aperture through blast doors in seconds. This allows him to maintain the momentum of an assault, never pausing for demolition teams, ensuring that the terror of his arrival is never mitigated by a delay. The distinction between the two gauntlets, Hunger and Slake, is a matter of grim philosophy within the chapter rather than a technical difference, as both appear identical in function. However, the Carcharodons believe that the weapons possess a metaphysical cycle. Hunger is the initiator, the claw that opens the wound, the drive that compels the shark to feed. Slake is the finisher, the satisfaction of the kill, the silence that follows the feeding frenzy. The heat of battle, Tyberos strikes with a rhythm that mirrors this concept, a tearing opening strike followed by a crushing, final blow. The gore that coats the weapons is rarely cleaned during a campaign. The blood creates a crust on the heating elements and clogs the teeth of the chain blades, only to be burned off or spun away when the weapons are next activated. This accumulation of biological matter is seen as a tithe to the weapons themselves, a necessary offering to keep their machine spirits appeased. The lethality of these weapons contributes directly to the phenomenon of the Red Wake, because Hunger and Slake are messy weapons, designed to shred, tear, and grind rather than cauterize or puncture cleanly. The carnage they leave behind is excessive. A victim struck by a power sword might die from a clean incision. A victim struck by Tyberos is often unrecognizable, reduced to a spray of viscera and fragmented bone. This creates the physical wake of blood that follows his path. In the confines of a starship corridor or a hive city tunnel, this effect is magnified. The walls, the ceiling, and the floor become coated in the remains of his enemies. The psychological impact of finding a squad of traitor Marines reduced to piles of wet armor and meat cannot be overstated. It signals to the enemy that they are not fighting a soldier who seeks to neutralize them, but a monster that seeks to consume them. The maintenance of such archaic and complex weapons falls to the highest-ranking forge rights of the Knicker. The technology required to keep the disruption field stable, while the chain motors are vibrating violently, is a lost art to many modern tech Marines. The power couplings must be constantly recalibrated to prevent feedback loops that could detonate the gauntlet's power cells. It is said that Tyberos spends hours in the armory shrines, watching silently as the tech thralls anoint the gears with sacred oils and replace the worn teeth of the chain blades. He does not remove the armor during these rites. He stands as a monolith, his hands detached for service, waiting for the return of his claws. This bond between master and weapon is absolute. Without Hunger and Slake, Tyberos would still be a giant of terrified strength, but with them, he is the avatar of the Carcharodons' exile, a force that has turned the tools of excavation and mining into the ultimate implements of butchery. The energy output of the gauntlets is so significant that when Tyberos teleports, the residual charge often arcs from the weapons to the surrounding environment upon materialization. This creates a localized EMP effect, blowing out the lights and cogitators in the immediate vicinity, plunging the kill zone into darkness just as the Red Brethren arrive. In that darkness, the only illumination comes from the crackling blue fields of the lightning claws and the faint, amber glow of the Shade Lord's sensor lenses. This interplay of shadow and energy is the last thing many enemies of the Imperium ever see. The sound of the chainfists revving in the dark, a wet, grinding mechanical roar, triggers a primal flight response that overrides military training. Even among the Adeptus Astartes, weapons of this magnitude are viewed with a mixture of awe and revulsion. A standard chapter master might wield a relic blade with a history of dueling champions or a bolter that has slain warlords. Tyberos's weapons have no such heroic lineage. They are tools of slaughter, devoid of elegance. They do not have names that inspire hope, like the Sword of Secrets or the Spear of Telesto. Hunger and Slake are names that speak of base, animalistic needs. They remind the observer that beneath the veneer of the transhuman warrior, there is a predator that must feed. The weapons are a statement that the Carcharodons Astra do not fight for glory or honor. They fight to satiate a debt of blood that can never be fully paid. As Tyberos carves his path through the galaxy, the twin relics serve as the jaws of the void, endlessly chewing through the enemies of mankind, leaving nothing behind but silence and red ruin. To investigate the genetic legacy of Tyberos is to delve into the erased history of the Adeptus Astartes, specifically the shadowed era of the Great Crusade, where the lines between the noble and the monstrous were frequently blurred. While the Carcharodons Astra are officially recognized as a successor chapter of the 19th Legion, the Raven Guard, their genealogy is far from a simple lineage. The biological evidence extracted from the nomad predation fleet, and specifically from the Shade Lord himself, points not to the liberation-focused sons of Corax who fought during the Horus Heresy, but to an older, darker strata of the Legion, the Terran-born veterans. These warriors, recruited from the Xeric tribes of Terra, were known as the Pale Nomads, or the Dust-Clad. They served under Horus before reuniting with their Primarch, and their methods of war, terror, enslavement, and brutal attrition were anathema to Corax's ideals of freedom and stealth. The title Tyberos bears, Shade Lord, is the strongest phylogenetic link to this forgotten past. In the annals of the 31st millennium, Shade Lord Arcus Fowl was the commander of the 19th Legion's Terran contingent. Following the disastrous Battle of Gate 42, where the Terran veterans were decimated in a frontal assault ordered by Horus, Corax effectively exiled the survivors. He dispatched Fowl and his fleet into the outer dark, ostensibly on a crusade of predation from which they were never recalled. Tyberos is the inheritor of Fowl's mandate and his title. The gene seed flowing through the Red Wake's veins is therefore not merely Raven Guard stock. It is an archaic, diverging strain that has been isolated from the parent legion for 10,000 years. It lacks the refinements and cultural shifts that the Raven Guard underwent after the heresy, preserving the ruthless, slaver culture of the pre-Corax 19th Legion. Tyberos is a living fossil of a time when the Astartes were conquerors first and protectors second. However, the purity of this lineage is a subject of intense debate and disturbing physical evidence. Tyberos possesses physical traits that align uncomfortably with the traitors of the 8th Legion, the Night Lords. Like the sons of Conrad Kurz, Tyberos and his brethren possess skin of a deathly graying pallor, often described as shark belly white, and eyes that are entirely black. The sclera is submerged in darkness, leaving no distinction between pupil and iris. While the Raven Guard are known for their pale skin and black eyes due to a mutation in the melanochrome and mucranoid organs, the Carcharodons' manifestation of these traits is far more severe. The skin of the Red Wake is not merely pale, it is thick, rough, and gray, resembling the hide of a cartilaginous fish. This has given rise to the chimeric hypothesis, a theory posited by members of the Ordo Astartes, suggesting that during their millennia of exile, the Carcharodons may have spliced their gene seed with scavenged genetic material from traitor legions to replenish their numbers. The suspicion is that the Carcharodons, scavenging for survival in the void, may have harvested gene seed from fallen Night Lords or even World Eaters. Tyberos's immense size and capacity for frenzy mirror the berserkers of Angron, while his terror tactics and ocular mutation mirror the Night Haunter's brood. If Tyberos is indeed a chimera, it would explain his divergence from the standard Raven Guard physiology. Yet loyalist apothecaries argue that these traits could simply be the result of genetic drift caused by 10,000 years of operating in the high radiation zones of the galactic rim without access to Mars' sanctified genetic correction. The shark-like features may be an extreme manifestation of the Raven Guard's inherent instability, exacerbated by the void-born nature of the chapter. Tyberos stands as the ultimate expression of this uncertainty. His biology is a locked vault, and he refuses to allow outsiders to take the samples necessary to unlock it. Deep within this genetic structure lies the curse known as the blindness, or in the Carcharodon's own tongue, the cold prey. This is a flaw analogous to the Raven Guard's sable brand or ash blindness. It is not the hot, screaming rage of the Blood Angels' black rage, but a descent into absolute, silent sociopathy. When the blindness takes a warrior, their pupils dilate until the eye is entirely black, and they lose all capacity for speech, strategy, or self-preservation. They become solitary hunters, seeking only to kill until they are killed. Tyberos is unique in that he appears to exist in a permanent state of controlled blindness. He channels the icy detachment of the affliction without losing his tactical acumen. He is the cold prey made manifest, a being stripped of all humanity, leaving only the predatory instinct. This suggests that his gene seed has stabilized the flaw, or that his will is so formidable he can force his biochemistry to submit. The management of this flaw drives the Carcharodon's need for fresh genetic material and links Tyberos to the renegade chapter known as the Ashen Claws. The Ashen Claws are the other half of the exiled Terran Raven Guard, those who turned entirely renegade and established a fiefdom in the Ghoul Stars. Unlike the Carcharodons, who remained loyal to the Emperor, the Ashen Claws abandoned the Imperium entirely. Despite this, Tyberos maintains an ancient pact with them. The Nicker has been recorded traveling to the Ashen Claw's fortress world of Adargates Prime. These meetings are not hostile engagements, but mercantile exchanges. Tyberos trades war gear, scavenged ships, and raw resources in exchange for uncorrupted gene seed stocks and aspirants harvested by the Ashen Claws. This relationship is critical to understanding Tyberos's genetic reality. The Ashen Claws refer to the Carcharodons as mongrels, a derogatory term implying that Tyberos's bloodline has indeed been mudded by cross-breeding with other sources, whereas the Ashen Claws claim to have kept the Terran Raven Guard blood pure. The fact that Tyberos tolerates this insult and treats with renegades highlights the desperation of his situation. He knows that his own gene seed is degrading, prone to the blindness and mutation. To prevent his chapter from devolving into mindless beasts, he requires the purer, albeit traitorous, blood of his distant cousins. This renegade tithe is the chapter's darkest secret. Tyberos is essentially bartering with traitors to maintain the Carcharodon's ability to serve the Imperium. The interactions between Tyberos and the Ashen Claw's master, Nehatnev, reveal a shared history that predates the modern Imperium. They speak in the dialect of the ancient Xeric tribes of Terra, a language dead for 10,000 years. This linguistic connection reinforces the theory that Tyberos is the cultural, if not direct biological, continuation of the old 19th Legion's leadership. The meetings are tense, often conducted with weapons drawn, yet bound by the blood of the Forgotten One. Tyberos navigates these encounters with the same silent menace he brings to the battlefield. He does not appeal to brotherhood or loyalty, he appeals to the transaction. He needs the gene seed to stabilize his warriors, and he pays for it in the currency of war. The physical toll of this lineage on Tyberos is evident in his isolation. The blindness makes social interaction physically painful for many Carcharodons, driving them to solitude. Tyberos spends weeks alone in his stratageum or the reclusiam, motionless. This is not meditation in the religious sense, but a physiological necessity to keep the beast contained. His physiology is on a constant knife edge. The tech adepts of the Nicker monitor his bio signs remotely, noting that his heart's beat at a resting rate far slower than a standard Astartes, akin to a reptile in hibernation, only to spike to fatal levels of adrenaline the moment combat is joined. This metabolic switch is characteristic of an ambush predator, further aligning his biology with the totemic shark of his chapter. Furthermore, the gene seed investigation sheds light on the Carcharodon's recruitment practices, the so-called Red Tithe. Tyberos targets worlds not just for supplies, but for human stock that possesses specific genetic markers compatible with their unstable implantation process. The rejection rate for Carcharodon aspirants is horrific, even by Astartes standards. The chimeric nature of the gene seed, combined with the severity of the blindness, means that only the most resilient and psychologically fractured youths can survive the ascension. Tyberos personally oversees the final stages of this induction. It is said that the aspirants must survive a hunt in the flooding lower decks of the Knicker, stalked by the Shade Lord himself. This is not merely a test of skill, but a genetic screening. Only those who can sense the predator in the dark, a trait linked to the 19th Legion's sensory mutations, are deemed worthy. The ambiguity of Tyberos' origins serves as a shield. If the High Lords of Terra knew for certain that he was trading with renegades in the Ghoul Stars, or if the Inquisition confirmed the presence of Night Lord's genetic markers in his blood, the Carcharodons would be declared excommunicate traitores. Tyberos is acutely aware of this. His silence is a strategic defense mechanism to prevent inquiry. By remaining a myth, a ghost story of the Outer Dark, he avoids the scrutiny that would doom his chapter. He walks the line between sanction and heresy, his very blood a testament to the Imperium's hypocrisies. He fights for a father who abandoned him, serves an emperor who has forgotten him, and shares blood with brothers who despise him. Ultimately, the question of whether Tyberos is a pure Raven Guard mutant or a chimeric monster is irrelevant to his function. The gene seed has shaped him into a weapon perfectly adapted for the void. The pale skin protects against radiation, the black eyes see in the absolute absence of light. The size allows him to dominate the close-quarters brutality of boarding actions. The blindness removes the hesitation of morality. Every aspect of his twisted genetics is honed for the Outer Dark, where the Carcharodons operate. He is the apex of a divergent evolution, a branch of the Astartes family tree that has grown gnarly and poisonous in the dark, yet remains strong. When he unleashes the Red Brethren, it is the release of ancient, pent-up violence that has been fermenting in his bloodline since the unification wars on Terra. The arrival of the Carcharodons Astra in the Badab War did not follow the standard protocols of Imperial reinforcement. There were no astropathic hails preceding their translation from the warp, no fanfare of trumpets, and no coordination with the Loyalist High Command led by the Red Scorpions. In the closing years of the 41st millennium, specifically around the year 911, the sensors of the picket ships on the edge of the Maelstrom Zone simply registered a sudden, massive displacement of reality. A fleet of gray, unadorned warships, their hulls scarred by the debris of the galactic rim and their engines burning with a dirty, inefficient plasma signature, materialized from the Empyrean. At the center of this formation was the Knicker, running silent, its weapons batteries cold but tracking every vessel in the vicinity. For several tense hours, the Loyalist commanders, including Lord High Commander Carib Culn, hesitated, unsure if these new arrivals were friends or a new traitor fleet allied with Luft Huron. When the identification ciphers were finally exchanged, they were archaic codes dating back to the Great Crusade, authorization keys that had not been in regular usage since the time the Emperor walked among men. Tyberos did not request permission to join the war. He simply transmitted a set of coordinates indicating his intended theater of operations and began his deployment. The Carcharodons had come to end the conflict, not through the slow strangulation of a siege, but through the application of extreme, concentrated violence. The entry of the Nomad Predation Fleet changed the calculus of the war instantly. Where the other Loyalist chapters, such as the Salamanders or the Marines Errant, were bound by the Codex Astartes and a concern for collateral damage, Tyberos operated with a mandate of total extermination. The target designated for his wrath was the Endymion Cluster, the stronghold of the Mantis Warriors, a secessionist chapter renowned for their guerrilla tactics and mastery of ambush warfare. The campaign for the Angstrom system and the wider Endymion Cluster, often referred to as the Tranquility Campaign, became a brutal lesson in the difference between a soldier and a predator. The Mantis Warriors were the masters of the mists, utilizing the dense nebulae and radioactive dust clouds of the zone to strike at Loyalist supply lines and vanish before a counterattack could be mustered. They were noble warriors who believed they were fighting for the autonomy of the Maelstrom Warders. Tyberos dismantled this tactical advantage by refusing to play their game. He did not chase their strike cruisers into the nebulas. Instead, the Shade Lord directed his fleet to the Mantis Warriors, recruiting worlds and industrial bases within the Tranquility system. He targeted the infrastructure that supported the enemy chapter, effectively taking the civilian population hostage. the Carcharodons launched a series of planetary assaults that were less about capturing territory and more about forcing the enemy into a killing box. Tyberos descended upon the hives and orbital stations of the Angstrom system with the Red Brethren. The strategy was simple: inflict such horrific casualties upon the populace and the defense forces that the Mantis warriors would be compelled by their honor to stand and fight. When the secessionist Astartes emerged from the shadows to defend their people, Tyberos was waiting. The battles that followed were characterized by a complete lack of chivalry. In the claustrophobic confines of the Tranquility reactor spires, the Carcharodons used the tight corridors to negate the Mantis warriors' mobility. Tyberos himself led the spearhead, his gray Terminator armor acting as the anvil against which the Mantis warriors broke. The psychological impact of seeing the red wake carve through veteran squads with lightning claws and chain fists shattered the cohesion of the defenders. The Mantis warriors, used to precise strikes and rapid redeployments, found themselves trapped in a meat grinder with an enemy that absorbed punishment without flinching and killed with industrial efficiency. This strategic dismantling culminated in a systematic purge of the Mantis warriors' assets. Tyberos did not just defeat their armies, he erased their capacity to wage war. The Carcharodons destroyed the secessionist armories, collapsed their training barracks, and burned their gene seed repositories. The violence was so absolute that reports from the Fire Hawks and Sons of Medusa, who were ostensibly allies, expressed revulsion at the methods employed. The Carcharodons did not take prisoners during the combat phase. They executed the wounded where they lay, conserving ammunition by using chain blades and combat knives. The silence of the Carcharodons during these massacres was absolute. Vox recordings from the Tranquility campaign capture only the screams of the dying and the wet tearing of flesh, with no battle cries from the gray-clad giants. The conclusion of the hostilities in the Endymion cluster brought about the event known as the Judgment of Endymion. The Mantis warriors, their numbers depleted and their recruiting worlds in ruins, had no choice but to capitulate. The surrender was not brokered by diplomats or the Inquisition, but was dictated by Tyberos in the ruins of the enemy's own fortress. The surviving leadership of the Mantis warriors, stripped of their weapons and helms, knelt before the Shade Lord. It is recorded that Tyberos stood motionless for the duration of the proceedings, his helmet sensory maw staring down at the defeated Astartes. He did not offer them the respect due to a fellow warrior. To him, they were merely prey that had ceased to struggle. The terms Tyberos dictated were savage and pragmatic, reflecting the scavenge-based existence of his fleet. While the High Lords of Terra and the inquisitorial representatives debated the ultimate fate of the secessionist chapters, penitent crusades, dissolution, or execution, Tyberos exacted an immediate price. He invoked the ancient rights of conquest, rights that predated the modern laws of the Imperium. He demanded the red tithe. The Carcharodons laid claim to the material wealth of the Mantis warriors to replenish what they had expended in the war. This was not limited to ammunition and fuel. Tyberos stripped the Mantis warriors of their remaining fleet assets, their relic weaponry, and their suits of tactical dreadnought armor. The Knickers' holds were filled with the wargear of a proud chapter, now reduced to scrap for the Carcharodons' forges. However, the most chilling aspect of the spoils of war was the claim regarding personnel. Tyberos demanded the surrender of the Mantis warriors' surviving neophytes and aspirants, the young men who had begun the transformation into space marines, but had not yet completed their training. To the horror of the other loyalists present, the Carcharodons rounded up hundreds of these initiates, along with a significant portion of the baseline human population from the Tranquility system. These captives were not taken as prisoners of war to be interrogated, they were taken as raw material. The aspirants would be subjected to the Carcharodons' own psycho-indoctrination and gene seed implantation, effectively erasing their past loyalty to the Mantis warriors and remaking them into weapons for the nomad predation fleet. The baseline humans were destined for the slave decks of the Knicker, to serve as serfs, laborers, and blood thralls. This act, the harvesting of a generation of a fellow Astartes chapter, cemented Tyberos' reputation as a monster in the eyes of his peers. Yet, from a strategic standpoint, it was a masterstroke of survival. The Carcharodons had entered the war with their ranks thinned by centuries of void patrols. They left it replenished, their armories stocked with the best gear the Badab sector had to offer, and their gene vaults filled with fresh stock. Tyberos had turned a punitive expedition into a massive resupply operation. He viewed the Mantis warriors not as traitors to be punished, but as a resource node to be mined. The transfer of these spoils was conducted with the same cold efficiency as the combat operations. Thunderhawks and heavy transport shuttles cycled endlessly between the surface of the conquered worlds and the waiting hangars of the Carcharodon fleet. The weeping of the population and the stoic silence of the captive aspirants were ignored. Tyberos oversaw the loading personally, standing on the embarkation decks, his presence ensuring that no loyalist commander dared to intervene. The Fire Hawks, aggressive and arrogant as they were, kept their distance. The Red Scorpions, rigid adherents to purity, lodged formal protests but did not engage. They recognized that the beast they had unleashed was sated, and to provoke it while it fed would be an act of suicide. Once the holds were full and the armories of the Mantis warriors were bare, the Carcharodons Astra departed as abruptly as they had arrived. They did not stay for the victory parades or the tribunal hearings that would condemn Luft-Huron. They did not participate in the final siege of the Palace of Thorns. Their contract was complete. The Angstrom system was pacified, the Endymion cluster was broken, and the price had been paid in blood and iron. As the Nicker turned its prow back toward the galactic rim and the engines flared to push the Leviathan into the warp, Tyberos left behind a sector traumatized not just by war, but by the nature of its saviors. The Red Wake had passed through Badab, and in its trail, it left a silence that was more terrifying than the roar of bolters, the silence of a predator that has eaten its fill and returned to the dark to wait for the next hunger pang. The departure from the Endymion cluster was not merely a strategic withdrawal. It was the resumption of an eternal hunt that necessitates a grim logistical cycle known within the chapter as the Tithes. To the administrative bodies of the Imperium, a Space Marine chapter is a supported organization, supplied by the Adeptus Munitorum and recruited from designated homeworlds. Tyberos and his nomad predation fleet possess neither. They are an entity entirely untethered from the Imperium's logistics network. To survive in the outer dark, where the supply lines of Terra do not reach, Tyberos enforces a binary system of acquisition that is as ruthless as his combat doctrine, the Red Tithe and the Grey Tithe. These are not requests for aid. They are non-negotiable seizures of assets, grounded in ancient charters that the Carcharodons Astra claim grant them the right to take whatever is required to continue their unending war. The Red Tithe is the most infamous and terrifying aspect of the Carcharodons' operations. It is the harvesting of flesh. The Nomad Predation Fleet is a ravenous beast that consumes manpower at an industrial rate. The attrition of void warfare, the lethal nature of the Carcharodons' training, and the sheer size of the fleet require a constant influx of human bodies. Tyberos directs his fleet not to civilized, high-population worlds where such abductions would draw the ire of the High Lords, but to the fringes, penal colonies, isolated mining outposts, and feral worlds lost in administrative errors. These worlds, often forgotten by the wider Imperium, become the hunting grounds for the chapter. When a Red Tithe is declared, the Carcharodons do not descend as angels of salvation. They arrive in silence, jamming local Vox networks and cutting off off-world communications. The strike teams, often led by the chapter's chaplains and librarians, known as the Reaper Primes and the Pale Nomads, secure the population centers. The goal is not extermination, but assessment. The entire population of a colony, which might number in the millions, is rounded up into holding pens, often utilizing the colony's own infrastructure against it. Tyberos views this mass of humanity not as citizens, but as raw ore. The weak, the elderly, and the infirm are often ignored or, if they offer resistance, liquidated with efficient brutality. The focus is on the strong. The sorting process is methodical and dehumanizing. The vast majority of those taken are destined for the lower decks of the fleet. A battle barge like the Nicker requires tens of thousands of serfs to operate its manual loading mechanisms, scrub its plasma conduits, and labor in its manufactorums. These unfortunates, dragged screaming from their homes, become chapter serfs. They are branded, shorn, and inducted into a life of servitude in the dark, replacing the generations that have died from radiation poisoning or exhaustion. For the penal colonists of worlds like Zartak, this is simply a transfer from one prison to a far harsher one. However, among the harvested, Tyberos seeks the precious few, young males with the genetic resilience and psychological latent aggression required to accept the Carcharodons' chimeric gene seed. The selection of aspirants during a red tithe is a trial by blood. Tyberos does not utilize the noble tournaments of Ultramar or the tribal rites of Fenris. The candidates are subjected to immediate, lethal pressure. They might be forced to fight one another in the dark, or navigate trapped corridors where failure results in death. Only those who display a predator's instinct, a willingness to kill to survive, are pulled from the herd. These boys are taken to the apothecarian decks of the Knicker, where they begin the agonizing transformation into space marines. The Red Tithe is the lifeblood of the chapter. Without these raids on imperial populations, the Carcharodons would have withered into extinction millennia ago. Tyberos oversees this with cold detachment, viewing the terror he inflicts on loyal subjects as a necessary transaction. Their lives are the currency paid to ensure the Carcharodons can continue to kill the enemies of mankind. Parallel to the harvesting of souls is the Grey Tithe, the acquisition of material. A chapter fleet requires immense resources to function: adamantium for armor repairs, promethium for engines, bolter shells, and spare parts for systems that have been obsolete for 10,000 years. The Grey Tithe is the method by which Tyberos keeps the Knicker and its escort vessels combat capable. While the Red Tithe is taken by force, the Grey Tithe often involves a dark commerce. The Carcharodons possess a vast quantity of archaeotech, relics from the Great Crusade, ancient patterns of Terminator armor, and Heresy-era weaponry that the Adeptus Mechanicus covets with religious fervor. Tyberos utilizes these relics as bargaining chips. The Nomad Predation fleet arranges rendezvous with explorator fleets of the Adeptus Mechanicus in deep space. These meetings are tense standoffs, with weapons locked on target. The Carcharodons offer up ancient data cores, salvage from space hulks, or pieces of lost technology recovered from the Halo stars. In exchange, the tech priests provide bulk transfers of raw materials, standard pattern ammunition, and refined fuel. It is a barter system that bypasses the bureaucracy of the Adeptus Munitorum. Tyberos is willing to part with a single suit of Crusade-era power armor if it secures enough bolter rounds to prosecute a decade-long campaign. He understands the value of the old to purchase the new. The Grey Tithe also extends to the uneasy relationship with the Ashen Claws in the Ghoul Stars. As previously noted regarding Gene Seed, this relationship is multifaceted. Beyond genetic material, the Ashen Claws possess manufacturing capabilities on their fortress worlds that the fleet-based Carcharodons lack. Tyberos trades scavenged xenotech and raw plunder taken from Xenos worlds for fresh wargear produced by the Ashen Claws' enslaved artificers. This trade is technically heresy, dealing with renegades, but to Tyberos, it is a logistical necessity. The distinct Mark V heresy armor plates and the Phobos pattern bolters common among the Carcharodons are often fruits of this illicit trade. The Shade Lord navigates these deals personally, his imposing presence ensuring that the Ashen Claws do not cheat the mongrels of their due. Furthermore, the Grey Tithe encompasses battlefield scavenging. The Carcharodons leave nothing behind. After a battle, tech marines swarm the field, stripping usable ceramite from fallen brothers and enemies alike. They recover every spent drop pod and harvest the reactors of destroyed vehicles. During the Badab War, the looting of the Mantis warriors was a high-profile example of this doctrine, but it occurs in every engagement. Tyberos demands a net positive outcome for every expenditure. If a torpedo is fired, the wreckage it creates must yield resources of equal or greater value. This miserly approach to war defines the aesthetic of the fleet. Everything is repaired, reused, and reinforced, giving their equipment a weathered, patchwork appearance that stands in stark contrast to the polished factory-fresh gear of other chapters. The moral ambiguity of Tyberos' leadership lies in the justification of these acts. To a planetary governor on a fringe world, the arrival of the Carcharodons is indistinguishable from a chaos raid. Families are torn apart, resources are stolen, and the world is left traumatized. Yet Tyberos operates under a mandate of absolute loyalty to the Emperor. He views himself as the warden of the outer dark, holding back tides of horrors, slogs, tyrannids, enslavers that would consume the entire Imperium if left unchecked. To maintain the strength to fight these apocalyptic threats, he sacrifices the few. The population of a penal colony is a negligible price to pay for the destruction of a hive fleet splinter. This utilitarian ruthlessness is the core of the Shade Lord's philosophy. He does not seek to be loved. He does not even seek to be understood. He accepts the role of the monster so that the citizens of the Segmentum Solar can sleep in ignorance of the true terrors that dwell in the void. When he orders the harvest of a loyalist population, there is no malice in his heart, nor is there pity. It is a calculation. The Nicker's reactors must be fed, its gun decks must be manned, and its ranks must be filled. If the Imperium will not supply him, he will take what is owed. He is a necessary evil, a weapon that has turned its hunger inward to sustain its edge. The psychological weight of the red tithe on the harvested aspirants creates a chapter culture of grim fatalism. Those who survive the process know that they were stolen, that their weak past selves were culled. They owe their existence to the predator that abducted them. This reinforces the reverence for Tyberos. He is the alpha who decided they were worthy of life, while their kin were relegated to slavery or death. It breeds a fanaticism that is distinct from the religious zeal of the Black Templars. It is the loyalty of the pack to the one who provides the meat. The Carcharodons fight not for the glory of the Emperor as an abstract deity, but for the survival of the chapter, embodied by the silent giant in the ancient Terminator armor. Tyberos's interactions with the Adeptus Terra regarding these practices are practically non-existent. The Inquisition suspects the nature of the Carcharodons, recruitment, but the nomad predation fleet is notoriously difficult to track, and their results are undeniable. When Tyberos does interact with imperial authorities, he presents the tithes as a fait accompli. He does not ask for forgiveness. He presents the dead bodies of the Emperor's enemies and the silence of the void as his only report. The High Lords tolerate the Red Wake because the alternative, losing the Carcharodons as a bulwark against the Halo threats, is far worse. They turn a blind eye to the missing colonies and the silent raids, accepting the bloody arithmetic that Tyberos presents. In the darkness of the Nicker's strategy room, Tyberos reviews the manifests of the gray and red tithes with the same scrutiny he applies to tactical maps. He tracks the caloric intake of the slave decks, the degradation rates of the bolter manufactorums, and the genetic rejection rates of the new aspirants. It is a burden of command that few other chapter masters face. Calgar has Crag, Dante has Baal. Tyberos has only the void and what he can wring from it. Every bolt shell in his magazine represents a trade deal with untrustworthy tech priests. Every serf loading a macro cannon represents a raid on a terrified human settlement. The Red Wake is not just a trail of blood left on the battlefield. It is the trail of suffering required to keep the Carcharodons Astra alive. The implementation of the tithes also dictates the operational tempo of the fleet. The Carcharodons cannot remain static. To stop moving is to starve. They must constantly move to new hunting grounds, new conflict zones where salvage can be claimed, and new sectors where the red tithe can be exacted upon the unaware. This nomadic existence is driven by the hunger of the fleet's logistics. Tyberos is the shark that must keep swimming. The gray and the red are the twin jaws of the beast, constantly snapping shut on the galaxy to feed the war machine at its heart. Even the equipment of the Red Brethren reflects this cycle. The Terminator suits worn by Tyberos's elite guard are often composites, built from the salvage of fallen enemies and the trades of the Grey Tithe. It is not uncommon to see a Carcharodon Terminator wearing a shoulder pad from a different mark of armor, or wielding a combi weapon that has been visibly modified with non-standard components. This lack of uniformity is a badge of honor among the Brethren. It signifies that the wargear has been earned, taken, and maintained through the chapter's own resourcefulness. Tyberos himself, with his heavily modified armor and unique weapons, is the ultimate exemplar of this doctrine, a warlord built from the scavenged strength of the past to secure the future. The theater of war that defines Tyberos and the nomad predation fleet is not the contested terrestrial soil of the Imperium's interior, but the crushing, icy vacuum of the galactic halo. While the Ultramarines manage the localized defense of the 500 worlds and the Imperial Fist stands sentinel over the Sol system, the Carcharodons Astra operate in the void beyond the light of the Astronomican. This region, known as the Outer Dark, is an expanse of absolute nothingness that exists above and below the galactic plane, a black ocean where the stars are distant pinpricks rather than guiding lights. Here, the Nicker patrols in a state of eternal vigilance, hunting threats that drift in from the intergalactic gulf before they can make landfall on Imperial soil. This operational doctrine dictates that Tyberos is rarely a conqueror of cities. He is a void warrior, a master of ship-to-ship boarding actions, and the claustrophobic brutality of hull breach assaults. The primary prey in this desolate domain has frequently been the splinter fleets of the Tyranid hive mind. The Carcharodons have a long, blood-soaked history of engaging hive fleet Leviathan, and its tendrils long before the bioships reached the biomass-rich sectors of the Segmentum Tempestus or Ultima. Tyberos has adapted the tactics of the chapter to counter the biological superiority of the Tyranids. He does not engage them in drawn-out attrition wars on planetary surfaces if it can be avoided. Instead, the Shade Lord directs the Nicker and its escorts to intercept the hive ships in deep space. The strategy is one of surgical decapitation. The Carcharodons launch boarding torpedoes and cestus assault rams directly into the pulsating, chitinous hides of the Norn Queen's vessels, bypassing the endless swarms of gaunts to strike at the synaptic nodes. In these engagements, Tyberos is a force of industrial destruction amidst a landscape of visceral horror. The interior of a Tyranid bioship is a nightmare of acidic veins, sphincter doors, and muscle walls. Standard bolter fire is often insufficient to clear a path through the dense, regenerating biomass. Tyberos, however, utilizes the chainfist underslung attachments of hunger and Slake to literally carve a tunnel through the living vessel. He wades through torrents of digestive fluids and ichor, his Terminator armor sealed against the vacuum and the toxins, grinding through bone, ribs, and cartilage. The cramped, fluid-filled arteries of a hive ship neutralize the Tyranids' numerical advantage, forcing the Xenos warriors into the kill zone of the Red Wake's claws. There are records of Tyberos holding a synaptic junction chamber alone against waves of genestealers and Tyranid warriors, his lightning claws flashing in the dark, reducing the Xenos' elite to a slurry of alien biology until the synapse creature could be butchered, sending the rest of the bioship into a dormant shock. This expertise in fighting the Great Devourer was notably demonstrated during the chapter's intervention in the Solar War against Leviathan, but it is the grim campaign on the penal moon of Zartak that serves as the definitive case study of Tyberos's tactical acumen when multiple threats converge. Zartak was a world shrouded in perpetual night, a mining colony and prison facility located in the gloom of the outermost systems. It represented the perfect hunting ground for a red tithe, teeming with hardy, desperate criminals suitable for recruitment. However, upon arrival, the Carcharodons found the moon already contested. A genestealer cult had risen from the depths of the mines, throwing the facility into anarchy, while a warband of the Night Lord's traitor legion, the Nightfall Brethren, had descended to harvest the population for their own sadistic rituals and slave stocks. The Zartak campaign became a three-way war of shadows. The Night Lords, masters of terror tactics, cut the power to the prison complex, plunging the corridors into absolute darkness, intending to panic the inmates and the cultists alike. They did not anticipate that they had entered a battlefield perfectly suited to the Carcharodons. Tyberos deployed the Red Brethren via teleportation directly into the administrative spire of the prison. The darkness that the Night Lords used as a weapon was the natural habitat of the Shade Lord. With his helmet sensors tuned to thermal and motion tracking, Tyberos moved through the unlit halls with the silence of a ghost. The Night Lords, arrogant in their heritage as the sons of Conrad Kurz, found themselves being hunted by a predator that did not scream, did not taunt, and did not feel fear. The climax of the engagement on Zartak occurred in the Central Generatorum, where the Night Lords' leadership had entrenched themselves. Tyberos led the assault personally. The contrast between the two forces was stark. The Night Lords were draped in flayed skin, their armor adorned with lightning bolts and screaming skulls, their vox grills amplifying their shrieks of combat. Tyberos was a monolith of gray ceramite, unadorned save for the bonding studs and the gore of the genestealers he had already butchered. He did not issue a challenge to the Night Lord's champion. He simply accelerated. The sheer mass of the Shade Lord, moving at the speed of a striking viper, caught the traitors off guard. In the ensuing melee, Tyberos demonstrated why he is feared even by the Adeptus Astartes. He caught the lightning claws of a Night Lord raptor on his pauldrons, the ancient bonding studs holding firm against the power field, before gutting the traitor with hunger. The chainfist tore through the chaos warped ceramite and the fused ribcage beneath, spraying the walls with the blood of the 8th Legion. When the Night Lord's sorcerer attempted to unleash psychic hellfire, Tyberos weathered the storm, his indomitous pattern plate groaning under the thermal stress but holding integrity long enough for him to close the distance. He ended the sorcerer's chanting not with a counter spell, but by crushing the traitor's helm and skull between the twin gauntlets, silencing the warp magic with a wet crunch. The victory on Zartak was total. The Night Lords were routed, the Genestealer cult was purged with flamers and heavy bolters, and the surviving prisoners, those who had lived through the horror of both Xenos and heretics, were dragged to the shuttles to begin their new lives as aspirants of the Carcharodons. This campaign highlighted the core philosophy of the Void Brethren, a doctrine that Tyberos embodies. The Carcharodons view themselves as the first line of defense, a concept distinct from the fortifications of the Imperial Fists. They do not man walls, they swim the moat. Tyberos believes that the Imperium is a fragile island of light surrounded by an ocean of monsters. If the monsters are allowed to reach the shore, the battle is already lost. Therefore, the Carcharodons must exist in the deep water, meeting the threats in the dark where no one else can see. This philosophy necessitates their brutal pragmatism. They cannot afford the luxury of mercy or the constraints of honor because they are fighting enemies, like the Tyranids and the Slog, that possess neither. The Void Brethren Creed also explains Tyberos's indifference to the collateral damage he inflicts on the Imperium he protects. In his calculus, the survival of the species justifies any local atrocity. If a mining colony must be stripped of its resources and population to refuel the Knicker so it can intercept a hive fleet, then that colony is a necessary sacrifice. He views the citizens of the Imperium not as individuals to be saved, but as cells in a larger organism. Sometimes, cells must die to keep the body alive. This detachment is what allows him to walk through the slaughter of Zartak without hesitation. He is not a hero saving prisoners, he is a resource manager securing assets. This mindset isolates Tyberos from other chapter masters. He does not attend the conclaves of the Adeptus Astartes. He has no interest in the politics of the Segmentum Command. His reality is the hum of the Knicker's reactor, the recycling of the air scrubbers, and the endless scan of the long-range augers. The Void Brethren are a brotherhood of exiles, bound together by the knowledge that they are the only thing standing between the galaxy and the horrors of the Halo stars. Tyberos is the anchor of this belief. His silence is the silence of the void. His violence is the violence of the storm. He is the reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, the only way to survive the outer dark is to become a monster that the dark itself learns to fear. The nature of this patrol through the empty quarters of the galaxy means that the Carcharodons often go decades without seeing another Imperial vessel. The Knicker becomes a world unto itself, a drifting city of gray metal. Tyberos stalks its decks like a localized gravity well, his presence keeping the crew focused on the mission. The discipline aboard the fleet is draconian. Minor infractions result in airlock expulsion or servitor conversion. This harshness is not cruelty for its own sake, but a survival mechanism. In the deep void, a single error can doom the entire chapter. Tyberos enforces this perfectionism personally. He inspects the torpedo bays and the engine rooms, his helmet turning to observe the serfs who scramble to avoid his gaze. He is the master of a ship of ghosts, sailing through a sea of night. Even the navigation of the nomad predation fleet reflects this isolation. The Carcharodons librarians, the pale nomads, guide the fleet through the warp not by the beacon of the Astronomican, which is often too dim to see in the outer dark, but by reading the currents of the Empyrean and the ripples left by their prey. They hunt by scent, metaphorically speaking. Tyberos trusts these psychers implicitly, a rarity for a chapter master, because he knows that without them, the fleet is blind. He stands on the bridge during warp transit. The blast shutters open, staring into the swirling madness of the immaterium. While other men would go mad, Tyberos watches the warp with the same impassive, predatory stare he turns upon his enemies. It is said that the demons of the warp scratch at the Geller fields of the Nicker, drawn by the aura of bloodshed that surrounds the red wake, but even they hesitate to breach the hull, sensing the apex predator that waits within. The wars Tyberos fights in these regions are unrecorded. There are no remembrancers to chronicle the boarding of a frail battle cruiser or the purging of a H-Shrud migration. These victories are known only to the Carcharodons and the silence of space. The trophies of these campaigns are mounted in the Nicker's reliquary, Xeno's skulls of species unknown to the Magos biologists, weapons of strange, crystalline geometry, and the shattered helms of renegades who thought they could hide in the halo. Tyberos walks these halls alone, his armored footsteps echoing amidst the evidence of 1,000 secret wars. Each trophy represents a threat that never reached the Imperium, a nightmare that was strangled in its crib by the Red Wake. This eternal vigil has stripped away everything that is not essential to war. Tyberos has no hobbies, no leisure, no personal desires. He is a biological machine calibrated for one purpose: the destruction of the Emperor's enemies in the environments where life is not meant to exist. His armor, his weapons, and his very soul have been eroded and rebuilt by the Void until they are indistinguishable from it. He is the sentinel of the outer dark, the shark that circles the campfire of humanity, keeping the wolves at bay, asking for no thanks, and accepting no payment other than the blood he spills and the flesh he takes to sustain his hunt. The operational efficacy of Tyberos is inextricably linked to the formation known as the Red Brethren. While the Shade Lord is a force of singular destruction, the tactical doctrine of the Carcharodons Astra dictates that no predator hunts entirely alone when the prey is of sufficient magnitude. The Red Brethren act as the first company veterans of the chapter, though their organization differs sharply from the Codex Astartes standard adhered to by chapters like the Imperial Fists. These are not merely elite warriors, they are the physical extension of Tyberos's will, a cadre of Terminators who have survived the meat grinder of the Outer Dark long enough to earn the right to stand in the shadow of the Red Wake. Their existence is defined by synchronization. When Tyberos moves, the Red Brethren move with him, not in response to verbal commands, but through a drilled, almost telepathic understanding of the Shade Lord's violence. The equipment of the Red Brethren reflects the scavenging nature of the fleet. Their suits of tactical dreadnought armor are rarely uniform. A single squad might display a mix of Indomitus, Tartaros, and even rare Saturnine pattern components, all unified by the abyssal gray ceramite of the chapter and the heavy use of molecular bonding studs to reinforce compromised plating. Unlike the ornate Terminators of the Blood Angels, who bear golden iconography and seals of purity, the Red Brethren bear the jagged, swirling exile markings of the Carcharodons, tribal patterns etched directly into the adamantium that denote kills, campaigns survived, and oaths of silence taken. They wield an array of heavy weaponry suited for close-quarters boarding actions, lightning claws to match their lord, thunder hammers for hull smashing, and chain fists to chew through bulkheads. In combat, the Red Brethren form a phalanx around Tyberos, creating a kill zone where nothing survives. Their deployment is almost exclusively via teleportation. The Carcharodons Tech Marines maintain the Nicker's teleportarium arrays with fanatical devotion, allowing for mass transit of Terminator armored bodies directly into the heart of enemy vessels. The arrival of the Red Brethren is heralded by the flash of displacement energy and the immediate, synchronized revving of chain weapons. They do not seek cover, they advance in a relentless wall of gray armor. Tyberos acts as the spearhead, breaking the enemy line, while the Red Brethren widen the breach, systematically slaughtering anything the Shade Lord leaves behind. The discipline required for this formation is absolute. A Red Brother would sooner allow himself to be cut down than break formation and expose Tyberos's flank, though the Shade Lord rarely requires such protection. While the Red Brethren provide the physical might to execute Tyberos's commands, the navigation of the Nomad Predation fleet relies on a far more esoteric power, the Librarius. In the regions beyond the galactic plane, the light of the Astronomican, the psychic beacon generated by the Emperor on Terra, is dim, flickering, or entirely absent. To navigate this lightless void without succumbing to the predations of the warp requires a breed of psyker distinct from the standard Imperial librarian. The Carcharodons call them the Pale Nomads. Foremost among them is Tyrik-Kage, the chief librarian of the chapter, a figure of immense age and power who serves as the Shade Lord's primary counsel in matters of the Empyrean. The relationship between Tyberos and Tyrik-Kage is one of the few dynamics within the chapter that approaches a partnership rather than a master-servant hierarchy. Tyberos is a creature of the material realm, a master of physical violence, but he is blind to the currents of the warp. Tyrik-Kage is his eyes in the dark. The chief librarian, often depicted with skin so pale it is translucent and covered in blue exile tattoos, bears the burden of guiding the Knicker through the turbulent tides of the immaterium without a lighthouse to steer by. He does this by reading the ripples in the void, psychic disturbances caused by the movement of massive enemies like hive fleets or the emotional resonance of terrified worlds. Tyberos relies on Tyrik-Kage to smell the blood in the water across light years of empty space. This reliance grants the Librarius a unique status aboard the Knicker. They are the navigators of the exile. Tyrik-Kage is one of the few individuals permitted to speak freely in the Shade Lord's presence, often interpreting the whispers of the void that Tyberos cannot hear. During the Badab War, it was Tyrik-Kage who advised Tyberos on the precise moment to translate from the warp to catch the Mantis warriors unaware. The interaction between the two is stark. Tyberos provides the directive to hunt, and Tyrik-Kage provides the path. There is a deep, unspoken respect between the giant in Terminator armor and the frail, ancient psyker. Both are afflicted by the curse of their bloodline, the blindness and the coldness, but they channel it into different purposes. Tyberos channels it into slaughter. Tyrik-Kage channels it into the icy discipline required to stare into the warp and not blink. The internal order of the Knicker and the wider fleet is maintained through a brutal hierarchy that mirrors the predatory nature of the chapter's totem. Tyberos is not a king who rules by divine right. He is the alpha who rules by superior lethality. The Carcharodons do not utilize the Codex Astartes' rigid promotion structures. Advancement within the ranks from scout to brother, and from brother to the Red Brethren, is determined by the reaping. These are sanctioned gladiatorial duels held in the flooding ballast tanks or the training pits of the battle barge. When a leadership position becomes vacant, or when a dispute arises between captains, the issue is settled with blades. Tyberos presides over these rights from a high gantry, silent and unmoving. The combat is not to first blood, but often to incapacitation or death, depending on the severity of the challenge. This Darwinian selection process ensures that only the strongest and most ruthless warriors ascend to command. A captain in the Carcharodons Astra holds his station only as long as he can physically defend it. This creates a culture of constant vigilance and razor-sharp competence. There is no room for complacency on the Knicker. A moment of weakness is an invitation to be replaced. Tyberos enforces this atmosphere to ensure that the weapon of the chapter remains honed. He understands that in the isolation of the outer dark, sentimental loyalty is a liability. Only strength ensures survival. Discipline for infractions that do not warrant a challenge is swift and terminal. The Carcharodons do not utilize penal legions or extended incarceration for their own battle brothers. Failure in battle, cowardice, or disobedience results in summary execution. Tyberos delegates this grim duty to the chaplains, known as Reapers, but he has been known to carry out the sentence himself if the offense occurs in his presence. There are accounts of the Shade Lord backhanding a subordinate with hunger for questioning a direct order during a boarding action, the blow instantly lethal. This absolute authority creates a shipboard environment of hushed efficiency. The serfs and chapter thralls move with heads bowed, terrified of drawing the gaze of the Grey Giants, while the Astartes themselves operate with a cold, professional detachment, knowing that their master demands perfection. This structure culminates in the profound isolation of Tyberos himself. The title of Shade Lord is not merely a rank, it is a burden of history that separates him from his brothers. He is the keeper of the Edict of Exile, the ancient order given by Korax that banished their ancestors from the Imperium. He alone knows the full truth of their origins, the depths of their genetic degradation, and the true extent of their dealings with renegades like the Ashen Claws. This knowledge is a wall that stands between him and the rest of the chapter. He cannot confide in his captains, for they are his subordinates who must see him as infallible. He cannot confide in the wider Imperium, for they would brand him a heretic. Physically, Tyberos is isolated by his own monstrosity. He cannot sit in the standard command thrones of the strike cruisers. He cannot fit through the hatches of standard rhinos. His life is confined to the oversized decks of the Nicker and the slaughter fields of the Void. He is a giant even among giants, a fact that induces a primal, transhuman dread, even in other space marines. When he walks the strategy deck, a wide berth opens around him, not out of ceremony but out of instinctual avoidance. His battle brothers respect him. They revere him as the avatar of their bloody creed, but they do not love him. He is too distant, too cold, too much like a machine of meat and metal. The solitude of the Shade Lord is most palpable in the moments between wars. When the Red Tithe is complete and the fleet is drifting in the silent running of a deep void patrol, Tyberos retires to his sanctum. It is a chamber devoid of comfort, lit only by the amber glow of tactical hololiths. Here he stands, he rarely sits, for days on end, reviewing the attrition rates, the gene seed purity logs, and the star charts of the Halo Zone. There is no camaraderie, no feasting, no tales of glory shared over ale. There is only the silence of the room and the rhythmic cycling of his armor's reactor. In these moments, Tyberos is the loneliest being in the sector, a warden chained to his duty, guarding a galaxy that fears him, leading a chapter of ghosts who are slowly fading into the dark. He accepts this isolation as the price of the power he wields. To be the Red Wake is to be a force of nature, and nature is inherently solitary. The shark does not seek the company of the school. It feeds, it swims, and it waits. The transition from the solitary vigil of the void to the kinetic fury of planetary assault is, for Tyberos and the Carcharodons Astra, a shift as abrupt as a guillotine blade dropping. The combat doctrine of the Red Wake is not derived from the standard tactical primers of the Codex Astartes, which advocate for balanced combined arms warfare. Instead, it is a predatory algorithm refined over 10,000 years of isolation, designed to maximize terror and resource acquisition while minimizing the expenditure of precious ammunition. A planetary assault led by Tyberos does not begin with the thunder of orbital bombardment or the long-range duels of lance batteries. Such tactics destroy the very infrastructure and population the Carcharodons seek to harvest. Instead, the assault begins in absolute silence. The Nomad predation fleet approaches its target running cold. The Nicker and its escort cruisers power down their main drive plumes, relying on inertia and maneuvering thrusters to drift into the system's gravity well. They mask their approach behind the electromagnetic radiation of local stars or the sensor shadows of moons. This phase relies heavily on the Raven Guard heritage embedded in their gene seed, utilizing the shadowed path to remain invisible to Auspex scans until they are within attack range. To the planetary defense forces on the surface or the crew of an enemy void station, the first warning of an attack is not a blip on a radar screen, but the visual confirmation of gray shark fin prows breaking through the cloud layer or filling the viewports. Once the element of surprise is secured, the doctrine shifts instantly from stealth to hyper-violence. There is no escalating skirmish phase. Tyberos authorizes the deployment of drop pods and boarding torpedoes in a singular, overwhelming wave. The goal is to saturate the target zone with Astartes before the enemy command structure can process the threat. The Carcharodons target void shield generators, communication hubs, and command spires simultaneously. When the drop pods slam into the Earth, they do not disgorge warriors who seek cover and establish firing lines. The ramps drop, and the Carcharodons charge directly into the enemy ranks. This shock assault is calculated to induce immediate panic. A defender who is running or cowering is a target that does not require a bolt shell to neutralize. They can be run down and butchered with chainswords, conserving ammunition for harder targets. Central to this doctrine is the weaponization of fear. Tyberos understands that morale is a resource as finite as promethium, and he drains it with ruthless efficiency. The reputation of the Carcharodons often arrives before they do, carried by the terrified whispers of void traders and the few survivors of previous tides. When the enemy realizes who has descended upon them, when they see the gray armor, the exile markings, and the silent, faceless helms, the will to fight often evaporates. Tyberos cultivates this terror. He does not allow his warriors to engage in banter or issue demands for surrender. The Carcharodons fight in a silence that is unnatural for a battlefield. They do not roar war cries, they do not shout orders. The only sounds they emit are the heavy tread of their boots, the roar of their chain weapons, and the wet tearing of impact. This void silence creates a psychological vacuum. The enemy screams, begs, and shouts, but receives no human response from the gray giants, only death. It reinforces the idea that the Carcharodons are not men, but biological automata sent to exterminate them. In the claustrophobic confines of a boarding action or the labyrinthine corridors of a hive city, Tyberos himself becomes the ultimate expression of this doctrine. His physical dimensions make him unsuited for open-field warfare where agility and cover are paramount, but in the zone mortalis, the fatal zone of close-quarters combat, he is an unstoppable force of nature. Tyberos prefers to lead assaults on enemy flagships or hardened bunkers where the fighting is restricted to hallways and chambers. In these environments, his bulk is an asset. When Tyberos steps into a corridor, he effectively fills it. His Terminator armor, broadened by the layered plasteel and bonding studs, turns him into a mobile bulkhead. There is no way to flank him, there is no way to squeeze past him. The enemy must go through him, and that is a tactical impossibility. The Shade Lord's movement in these engagements defies the logic of his mass. While he does not possess the jump-pack agility of the Raven Guard's Dark Furies, his servos and muscle fibers are tuned for explosive bursts of acceleration. He moves with the sudden, jerking speed of a shark snapping at prey. He closes the distance to the enemy before they can bring heavy weaponry to bear. His fighting style is devoid of the dueling finesse seen in chapters like The Emperor's Children or The Blood Angels. He does not parry, he absorbs. He relies on the immense thickness of his modified Indomitus plate to weather small arms fire and glancing blows from power weapons. He walks through bolter fusillades as if walking through a stiff wind, the shells detonating harmlessly against his pauldrons, serving only to strip the paint and reveal the dark iron beneath. Once within reach, the combat doctrine of the Red Wake revolves entirely around the unique properties of hunger and slake. These weapons dictate a fighting style that is visceral and messy. Tyberos does not stab, he excavates. The lightning claw components of the gauntlets are used to trap the enemy or shear through their defenses. The disruption fields destroy the molecular bonds of armor, allowing the claws to sink deep into the target. Then, the secondary mechanism engages. The underslung chainfists, roaring with adamantine teeth, are brought into contact with the meat and metal held in the claw's grip. Tyberos grinds his enemies apart. He targets the center of mass, plunging his gauntlets into the chest cavities of Astartes or the hulls of dreadnoughts, and simply revs the motors until the target ceases to exist as a cohesive biological or mechanical unit. This method of killing is referred to as rip and tear by the few imperial scholars who have analyzed the aftermath of his battles. It is performative gore. Tyberos does not kill cleanly because a clean kill looks like a soldier's work. A body reduced to a spray of arterial fluid and shredded armor looks like the work of a monster. When Tyberos tears a traitor marine in half or rips the cockpit out of a sentinel walker, he is sending a message to every other enemy combatant in the vicinity. The sight of their comrades being physically dismantled breaks the enemy's nerve. It causes hesitation, trembling hands, and the urge to flee. Tyberos exploits this split second of horror to close the gap to the next target. He turns the battlefield into a slaughterhouse, where the floor becomes slick with blood and the air fills with a copper mist. This brutality serves a secondary purpose in the Carcharodons' resource-focused mindset. By engaging in melee, Tyberos ensures that the enemy's wargear is not totally destroyed by high explosives, but the enemy combatant is removed. A chainfist to the torso kills the marine but leaves the helmet, the pauldrons, and the backpack power unit relatively intact for salvage. It is a grim form of precision. Furthermore, the red wake that he leaves behind, the corridors painted in blood, serves as a territorial marker. As the Carcharodons advance, they leave a trail of absolute carnage that prevents the enemy from rallying behind them. No one wants to retake a corridor that Tyberos has cleared, The sheer horror of the remains found there is enough to make hardened veterans vomit and retreat. Despite the carnage he inflicts, Tyberos remains utterly dispassionate. This contrast is the most jarring aspect of his combat presence. A world-eater berserker screams in rage as he butchers. Tyberos is silent. His heart rate, monitored by the Knicker's apothecaries, barely elevates above resting levels even as he is disemboweling a broodlord. He kills with the repetitive, rhythmic motion of a machine press. Swipe, lock, grind, release. Swipe, lock, grind, release. There is no sadism in his actions, only function. He is clearing an obstruction. This lack of emotion makes him terrifying to fight against because he cannot be taunted, he cannot be baited by anger, and he cannot be reasoned with. He is simply processing the enemy until the area is secure. The use of the teleportarium is the final key element of his personal doctrine. Tyberos does not like to walk to the battle. He prefers to materialize inside the enemy's defense perimeter. The Carcharodons have mastered the art of blind teleportation, utilizing the sensors of the first wave of drop pods to triangulate coordinates for the Terminator assault. Tyberos and the Red Brethren arrive in a flash of ozone and displacement lightning, often directly onto the bridge of an enemy ship or the command bunker of a planetary governor. This decapitation strike strategy is designed to end conflicts rapidly. If Tyberos can kill the enemy warlord in the first 10 minutes of the engagement, the organized resistance collapses, and the Carcharodons can proceed to the harvesting phase without suffering significant casualties. In these command center assaults, Tyberos targets the leadership specifically. He ignores the bodyguards if possible, absorbing their attacks on his armor to focus on the primary threat. During the scouring of the Vindor sector, he famously materialized within the court of a secessionist arch-cardinal. While the Red Brethren held back the palace guard, Tyberos walked directly to the throne. He did not speak a word of judgment. He simply caught the cardinal's power scepter in Slake, sheared it in two, and then applied hunger to the traitor's torso. The war ended the moment the cardinal's body hit the floor. The silence that followed, with Tyberos standing amidst the ruin of the throne room, his armor dripping, was the signal that the planet now belonged to the Carcharodons. This doctrine extends to the coordination with his fleet. Tyberos is not just a warrior, he is an admiral. Even in the thick of melee, he is plugged into the Knicker's tactical grid via his helmet's manifold. He directs the movement of squads and the firing arcs of the ship's macro cannons with micro bursts of data. He uses his own position as a lure, drawing enemy reinforcements toward him to expose their flanks to the rest of his forces. He treats himself as a heavy siege unit, a piece of equipment to be deployed where the fighting is thickest. He has no regard for his own safety, trusting in the ancient strength of his Terminator plate and the lethality of his claws to see him through. When the fighting moves to the harvesting phase, Tyberos shifts his targeting parameters. If the objective is to capture slaves or aspirants, he deactivates the chainfist motors. He uses the flat of his claws or the sheer weight of his armored body to incapacitate rather than kill. A backhand from Tyberos is enough to shatter every rib in a mortal's body and knock them unconscious without killing them instantly. This allows the apothecaries and slave masters following in his wake to collect the bodies. It is a terrifying display of control, that a being capable of shredding tank armor can dial back his violence just enough to leave a victim broken, but alive for the tithe. The aftermath of a Tyberos-led assault is always the same. The silence returns. The screaming stops because the resistance has been broken. The Red Wake stands at the center of the devastation, his sensors scanning for any lingering heat signatures. He does not celebrate. He does not raise a fist in victory. He simply waits for the extraction Thunderhawks or the teleport Homer to cycle up. The gore on his armor begins to dry, adding another layer to the patina of death that covers him. To the survivors peering out from the ruins, he looks like a statue of judgment carved from gray stone and blood, a reminder that in the dark corners of the galaxy, there are things far worse than death, and the Carcharodons are their jailers. The opening of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, shattered the logistical spine of the Imperium and plunged half the galaxy into the nightmare of the Dark Imperium. Yet for the Carcharodons Astra, this galactic catastrophe was merely a shift in the tides of their eternal ocean. While the Ultramarines and the Imperial Fists scrambled to secure the sanctified space of the Segmentum Solar, Tyberos and the Nomad Predation Fleet found themselves in an environment that perfectly mirrored their combat doctrine, a realm of absolute isolation, cut off from the light of the Astronomican, where survival dictated a policy of extreme prejudice. The era Indomitus did not bring panic to the bridge of the Nicker, it brought a proliferation of targets. The darkness that blinded the rest of the galaxy was the natural habitat of the Void Brethren, and as the warp storms boiled across the sky, the Carcharodons simply continued their hunt, now hidden even more effectively from the prying eyes of the Inquisition. The arrival of the Torchbearer fleets, the task forces dispatched by Robute Guilliman and Archmagos Belisarius Call to distribute the Primaris technology to the Astartes chapters, presented a unique diplomatic challenge for a force as reclusive as the Carcharodons. Standard protocol for the Torchbearers involved locating a chapter's fortress monastery and initiating pompous rituals of gene seed transfer. The Carcharodons, having no homeworld and operating under a shroud of deliberate obfuscation, were almost impossible to find. It is believed that the meeting did not occur in a civilized system, but in the deep void of the galactic rim, likely facilitated by the Carcharodons' own librarians sensing the approach of the Custodes-led vessels. When the Torchbearers finally made contact with the Nicker, they did not find a chapter desperate for salvation, but a predatory fleet that viewed the arrival of the Primaris technology not as a gift, but as a long overdue tithe from the Terra that had forgotten them. Intelligence reports from the few indentured scribes permitted to witness the exchange suggest that Tyberos accepted the secrets of the Primaris creation and the new Mark 10 power armor patterns with his characteristic silence. There were no oaths of fealty renewed to the Lord Regent, only the cold transaction of data cores and gene stocks. The integration of Primaris Marines into the Carcharodons has since proceeded with ruthless efficiency. The new breed of Astartes, specifically the Vanguard formations clad in Phobos armor, aligned perfectly with the stealth terror tactics of the chapter. The Carcharodons saw the infiltrators and reavers not as a break from tradition, but as updated tools for their ancient trade. However, unlike chapters that struggled with the cultural integration of the awakened Primaris, Tyberos ensured assimilation through the brutal rites of the Void. Any Greyshields transferred to his command were immediately subjected to the harsh realities of the fleet, stripped of their Mars-born naivety, and forged into Void Brethren through blood duels and the silence of the outer dark. The question that has occupied the minds of Imperial scholars and the biologists adepts of the Ordo Astartes is the status of the Red Wake himself in this new era. With many chapter masters, such as Marnius Calgar and Kayvon Shrike, crossing the Rubicon Primaris to become physically grander and more resilient beings, speculation runs rampant regarding Tyberos. Current analysis of long-range picked captures and after-action reports suggests that Tyberos has not undergone the procedure. The prevailing theory is that the Rubicon Primaris is neither necessary nor physiologically viable for the Shade Lord. Tyberos is already a biological anomaly, a giant whose stature exceeds that of even the heavy Gravis armored Primaris Marines. His physiology is a relic of the forgotten gene craft of the ancient 19th Legion, pushed to the limits of gigantism and stability. To subject such a heavily modified and unique organism to the trauma of the Rubicon could result in catastrophic genetic rejection or the destabilization of the blindness that he keeps in check with his iron will. Furthermore, the integration of Tyberos into the Primaris doctrine presents a logistical impossibility regarding his wargear. The Mark 10 Tacticus and Gravis suits are modular marvels of modern innovation, but Tyberos is encased in a sarcophagus of modified Indomitus plating that has been fused, patched, and reinforced over millennia. His armor is not merely equipment, it is a part of his physical identity, bonded to his black carapace through archaic interfaces that may not be compatible with the new tech base. To strip Tyberos of his ancient suit would be to strip him of the history of his exile. He remains, therefore, a monster of the old breed, a firstborn Leviathan walking among the new demigods, proving through sheer violence that the old methods of slaughter possess a lethality that calls innovations cannot replicate. He stands as a bridge between the shadowy past of the Bad Ebb War era and the high-tech future of the Indomitus Crusade, a reminder that size and strength were not invented in the 41st millennium. Operating within the Imperium Nihilus, the current movements of the Nicker are tracked only by the trail of dead worlds and shattered enemy fleets left in its wake. With the light of the Emperor obscured, the Carcharodons have become the apex predators of the darkened half of the galaxy. They do not coordinate with Dante's regency on Baal. They operate independently, striking at the supply lines of the Black Legion and the raiding fleets of the Drukhari. Recent fragmentary reports from the Nachman Gauntlet suggest that the Nomad Predation Fleet has been utilizing the chaos of the Great Rift to ambush Chaos warbands that believe themselves the Hunters. Tyberos has turned the anarchy of the Dark Imperium against its architects, using the warp storms to mask the approach of his boarding torpedoes. In a galaxy gone mad, the absolute cold order of the Carcharodons, kill teams, offers a grim counterbalance to the hysteria of the demonic. The legacy of Tyberos the Red Wake, as the 41st millennium bleeds into the 42nd, is solidified not as a hero of the Imperium, but as its necessary monster. He represents the uncomfortable truth that the survival of humanity requires acts of barbarism equal to those of its enemies. In the gilded halls of Terra, statues are erected to the noble sons of Dorn and Guilliman, warriors who embody the hope of a better future. There are no statues of Tyberos. His legacy is written in the silence of the void and the empty lists of the Red Tithe. He is the personification of the cruelest survival, the idea that to keep the flame of humanity flickering, one must be willing to feed it with human fuel. He is the warden who locks the door and throws away the key, trapping the monsters in the dark with him, ensuring that while the citizens of the Imperium may have nightmares, the things that cause those nightmares are being hunted and dismantled by something far worse. As the era Indomitus progresses, the Carcharodons Astra remain a terrifying enigma, their loyalty unquestionable yet their methods abhorrent. Tyberos stands at the center of this paradox, a silent giant in gray, watching the galaxy burn through black, shark-like eyes. He does not seek to rebuild the Imperium. He seeks only to kill its enemies until the stars themselves go cold. The Red Wake is not a temporary phenomenon. It is a permanent state of existence for the Shade Lord. As long as there is a void to sail and prey to hunt, Tyberos will be there, the silent reaper in the dark, the great white shark in the sea of stars, ensuring that the enemies of mankind never find safe harbor in the shadows. This is the legacy of the Red Wake, a promise that no matter how deep the darkness becomes, there is always something waiting in it, silent, hungry, and loyal to the death.